Have you ever noticed that you're not actually one person? You're two people. That may sound crazy, but think about it this way. You usually hear people say, I love myself. Just think about that statement for a moment. How many people are in that statement? For starters, there's I, the person who's doing the loving, and then there's myself, the person who's being loved. Those are two people, not one. You may think that's just how language works, but a statement like this brings out the duality that exists inside every human being. You're not actually one individual. You're like a coin with two different sides that exist as one, or look like one. And by the way, this is also why you can talk to yourself. You couldn't talk to yourself if you were only one person. That wouldn't make sense. For you to talk to yourself, there has to be two people, the person talking and the person listening. So you are actually not one person. You exist as a duality. And existing as a duality, spiritually speaking, is kind of a problem. Or rather, let me rephrase. Existing as two is the reason that human beings are disconnected from God. If you're new to my content, I'm Henry, and this is Yeshua the Nazarene, episode 7, a series where we explore the person and teachings of Jesus Christ from a spiritual perspective. And in this video, we're going to be looking at our wisdom teaching by Yeshua from the Gospel of Thomas. In this teaching, Jesus explains how that duality of being two people is the only obstacle that keeps us from entering the kingdom of God, or in other words, from being made one with the source. The reading is from the Gospel of Thomas, saying 22, and it says, Jesus saw infants being suckled. He said to his disciples, these infants being suckled are like those who enter the kingdom. They said to him, shall we then as children enter the kingdom? Jesus said to them, when you make the two one, and when you make the inside like the outside, and the outside like the inside, and the above like the below, and when you make the male and the female one and the same, so that the male is no longer male, and the female no longer female, when you fashion eyes in the place of an eye, and a hand in place of a hand, and a foot in place of a foot, and a likeness in place of a likeness, then you will enter the kingdom. At first, this teaching may sound confusing, but let's unpack it slowly. So it starts by saying Jesus saw infants being suckled, and he told his disciples, these infants are like those who enter the kingdom. The reason Yeshua equated entering the kingdom of God with being like a child is because children, especially infants, don't have that voice we all have in our heads. The one that keeps talking all the time, and actually the voice that you talk to yourself using. An infant does not have that. Their mind has not yet created this character that we all have in our heads. An infant doesn't have a mental sense of self. They don't have an ego, or rather, their ego has not developed yet. That voice in your head usually grows with time and experience. So Yeshua says, only the one who is like an infant being suckled, without that mental sense of self and without that constant chattering in the mind, that person is like those who enter the kingdom. And this brings up the duality I mentioned earlier. So I said every human being exists as a duality, as two people inside one individual. So the question is, who are those two people? Well, obviously it's not really two people, it's just a separation of the same person into two different entities. The first entity or person is your mind, and the second is your heart. And by heart, I don't mean the physical, biological organ, I mean the spirit, or what is sometimes called the heart chakra, which is the true center of your being. Your heart or your spirit is the seat of your true self. So here's how the dynamic of the duality works. Like for example, when you're talking to yourself, it's usually the mind talking and the spirit listening. The mind is that constant voice in your head that never stops talking. It's always judging everything and analyzing everything around you. while your heart is that sense of presence and being. It's always quiet and it's always listening and observing. So these are the two people inside of you. The first person is the mind, the second is the spirit. And that's why Yeshua continues to say in the passage, when you make the two into one, you will enter the kingdom. By make the two into one, Yeshua is talking about destroying the illusion of duality. Because this duality is obviously an illusion. You're not two people, you're one person. When you make the mind and the spirit one and the same thing, you will enter the kingdom of God. Here's why this makes sense. First of all, I keep saying your spirit, but there's nothing like your spirit. There's only one spirit, the Spirit of God. The essence that rests in your heart chakra is the Spirit of God. So technically, to make the two into one, to make the mind and the spirit into one, doesn't mean to merge them. It means to get rid of the mind, because the mind is the fake self. That sense of self that you have in your head is an illusion. Your true self is your heart. Your true self is God. So when you remove that which is fake in you, you automatically enter the kingdom of God. That which is fake in you is your ego. It's your mental sense of self. It's the idea you have in your head of who you think you are. It's the story that you tell yourself about your name, your past, your dreams, your hopes. That is the fake self. That is the mind. And Yeshua says, when you make the two into one, when you remove the illusion that there's a separate self that lives in your head, you will enter the kingdom of God. Or in other words, when you put your mind to the side and allow your heart space to lead, allow the spirit to be the center of your being, you will become one with the source. This is why meditation is usually such an important spiritual practice, because when you meditate, you essentially do exactly what Yeshua is describing here. When you meditate, you silence your mind. You quiet that voice in your head and you make it disappear. And that act by itself makes the two into one and ushers you into the kingdom of God. This teaching by Yeshua is absolutely profound. And the rest of the passage continues along this same line. When he says, when you make the inside like the outside and the female like the male, he's talking about the same exact thing again. Because it's usually said that every human being has both feminine and masculine energy inside of them. And the masculine energy is usually the mind, while the feminine energy is the spirit or the heart. So when Yeshua says, when you make the feminine like the masculine, you'll enter the kingdom, he's essentially continuing that same explanation of making the mind and the spirit into one, of removing the illusion that there's a self in your head and realizing that all along your true self was in your heart. Your true self was God. And then the last part of the teaching is perhaps the most interesting. It says, when you fashion eyes in the place of an eye, and a hand in place of a hand, and a foot in place of a foot, and a likeness in place of a likeness, then you will enter the kingdom. This part may sound like gibberish at first, but Yeshua is actually talking about the transformation that comes about once you have done what he described earlier. Once you have made the two into one, you have to become a new creature. You have to be born again, as the Christians would put it. And that's what this part is talking about. When you fashion eyes in the place of an eye, this is talking about adopting a new perspective and starting to see things differently, because you're no longer living in the illusion of separateness or duality. You now know you're one with God, and therefore everything about you has to change. Your eyes have to be renewed. You have to fashion an eye in the place of your old eyes. Your hands, which signify your actions, also have to be remade. You start doing things differently and doing different things that are all centered around love. because the heart chakra is usually associated with love, and it makes perfect sense because God is love. When you become heart-centered, you, as Yeshua puts it, fashion a hand in place of a hand. You stop acting or doing things like your old self, and you start acting from your new center, which is love. And the last line says, when you fashion a likeness in place of a likeness. This part is talking about self-image. When you make the two into one, even the person you think you are has to change. The way you see yourself, or the likeness of yourself you have in your head, has to be renewed. You start to see yourself differently, and that is essentially what a spiritual awakening is. It is dying to your old self and being reborn as a new being who is heart-centered, who is led by their spirit, and therefore lives with the knowledge of their oneness with Source. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the series. If you did, like, comment, share, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.